Welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host, and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Joining me today is Kerrie-Ann Vassall-Richards, who is no stranger to the ICT Pulse podcast. Kerrie-Ann is the founder of the Business Growth Rocket, but more importantly, she's also an advisory council member at the American Registry for Internet Numbers, ARIN. So today, and for the most part, our discussions are going to be focused on internet governance. Kerrie, welcome once again to our show.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me. Thanks. And hello to everyone out there who's listening in to this podcast.
So, Kerrie, ARIN, although the name might seem explanatory, American Registry for Internet Numbers, can you give us a clearer sense of what the organization is about?
So ARIN, well, I'll tell you a bit more about where they cover, because ARIN covers Canada, the US, and parts of the Caribbean. And what they do is they are a regional internet registry. So I don't want to get too complex, but there are 5 regional internet registries, and ARIN is one of them that covers that geographic region. So it's all about developing policy based on, how the internet is run and how it's growing within that region. So we do things like number allocations. At the advisory council level, we only deal with policy. So the advisory council doesn't necessarily deal with how ARIN is run, but we deal with how the numbers are allocated.
Sorry, Kerrie, I just wanted to ask, so when you say numbers, internet numbers, what do you mean?
Right. So for every, how do I put this in? I don't want to use a lot of jargon, but when we talk about, say, internet protocol numbers, so every IP number has to come from somewhere. It may be your telecoms provider. They may come to ARIN to buy a block of numbers, and then those numbers are then allocated to their various end users. So, when you're using the internet, very often you see IP addresses here and there. Depending on the region that you're located in, more often than not, these IP addresses are part of a bigger block, and that block would have been purchased from ARIN.
Okay, and the format that we usually tend to see for IP addresses, especially when they represent websites, maybe up to 12 digits, groups of 3, so maybe something like 192.168.255.255.
Right. Yes. So right now we have the IPv4 is almost depleted. You have persons who have small blocks of those, but right now ARIN is allocating IPv6 number blocks, and those are vast. So when someone comes in to take for instance a telecoms company comes in to purchase a block of that size, the chances of it being depleted are very, very small. But it also means that, when we talk about the Internet of Things, almost everything has an IP address, from, medical equipment. Almost everything has an IP address. So to have everything interconnected, everything needs to have that number. But as I said, because we're looking at IPv6 now, the chances of it or a block being depleted are very slim. And there's lots on hand at ARIN to be able to make those purchases.
Okay. Just for our listeners, I will put some more information about IPv4, IPv6 in our show notes. I think, just to clarify, oftentimes when you have what would be the domain name, so for example, for ICT Pulse, ict-pulse.com, it gets translated into numbers, into a number and a number code. And what Kerrie is saying is basically that what she referred to as IPv4, which is Internet Protocol version 4, it was a format in which the numbers were assembled or conceptualized, and however that has changed. So I'll put some more information about it in our show notes for those who might be interested and need further clarity, because it can be a bit complicated if you're not au fait with it already. Oh, so you were telling me about there being, I guess, there are 5 registries,
Correct.
ARIN being one for North America and some Caribbean countries,
Correct.
and there is like for Latin America, which I think includes some countries in the Southern Caribbean.
Correct.
What would be the others?
So we have, and forgive me if my memory fails me, but we have AFRINIC covering the African countries. We have APNIC covering the Asian Pacific countries.
Yes.
We have RIPE, which covers Europe. We have ARIN, as we spoke about earlier, and we have, I can't remember the Latin American one, which is terrible, but yes.
Latin America and Caribbean Network Information Center.
Yes,
so that's LATNIC.
Yes.
So as you also mentioned that as the advisory council member, and I gather that you've been in the position for almost a year, you'll just focus primarily on policy.
Correct. So under ARIN, so ARIN does 4 main things, and one of the things that the thing that we focus on is the policy development. The other things that they focus on is registry services, organization services, and technical services. So I focus, or the advisory council focuses on the policy development services. So making sure that the public understands what the public consultation process is like. The policy development process, make sure that persons fully understand how they can be a part of the policy development process. It's a very interesting process. I was writing about it a few days ago when, you hear about public consultation, and we know in the Caribbean, sometimes we hear about public consultation and it's, they won't listen to me anyway, so why be a part of it? When I attended my first ARIN meeting in April of last year, my first face-to-face meeting, because I've participated remotely. When I attended that meeting, it was very interesting to see that they actually do take into consideration the voice of the public, whether it's someone there face-to-face or a remote participant. So it was very interesting to see, and I was very happy to see it, because we always, as I said before, we always hear about public consultation, but to see it in action at ARIN, it was refreshing to see, persons from, and as much as we are in the Caribbean, and our voice may not be as loud there, when I listened to some of the issues that persons were having in, remote parts of Canada, I said, but this sounds very much like, the deep rural connectivity issues we're having in the Caribbean.
Yes.
So sometimes listening to or observing, you realize that, some of the issues, no matter where we are located, some of the issues are the same.
Excellent. So what are some of the big issues ARIN has been addressing these days?
Well, the IPv6 stuff, all of that has been before my time. But right now we're looking at things like making sure that people aren't trying to game the system. So there's a complex way that the number resources are allocated. There are waiting lists for various size blocks. And what happens sometimes is that some companies may find loopholes. So it's just going through the entire policy, number resource policy, and making sure that the loopholes are all sealed up, to make sure that it's a fair allocation that happens. How ARIN works is that the public can submit a policy, or there's a template that they can use in order to submit a draft policy. And what happens is once they follow that template, fill in that template, it's simply sent into ARIN. Once that's done, it is reviewed by the chairman of the advisory council, who will then allocate 2 shepherds. So you have a primary shepherd who's someone who has a bit more experience on the advisory council, and a secondary shepherd who, that person would support the primary shepherd in making sure that the policy is reviewed properly. Once that's done, and I mean, when I say that someone submits a policy, it could be anyone.
Right.
As long as you're an internet user within North America or the Caribbean, as covered by ARIN, anyone can submit a draft policy, a policy proposal, sorry. And that policy proposal is then refined with the shepherds to try and make sure that, say the problem statement is exceptionally clear, so that when it gets time to put it to the community for discussion, it's easier for the community to understand why this proposal was put forward. Not everything makes it right through the entire policy development process. And I'll share a link to the ARIN policy development process with you so that persons can see the entire process.
Oh, excellent.
What I found in, as I straddle business and ICT, I find that this policy development process is something that can be replicated in other areas as well. But back to this. As I said, sometimes it goes the entire route of the policy development process. However, there are times when it gets to the community conversation, so when the community gets involved in the discussion, when it's put to a mailing list, and we'll talk about mailing lists as well, there are times when the community participation proves overwhelmingly that, this may not be a huge issue
Right.
that needs a policy change. Every community voice is taken into consideration. So sitting on the advisory council, we are not allowed to have bias. So we have to take a look at, what is the public saying via the community, the mailing lists or any of the public meetings. And then we have to say, okay, so overwhelmingly the public says this,
Right.
and this is what we have to go with. And we have a number of persons who are not knowledgeable of, say, the history of why something like this, whatever the policy proposal would be, why that would have been proposed, and, they'd be able to provide depth and enrich the conversation. But it's really about conversation, making sure that the constituents fully understand what the changes and the implications that a policy change could have. And, just making sure that it goes through all the correct channels.
Now, you had mentioned before sometimes about some of the problems that might be occurring in rural Canada and how they might actually be similar to what we experience here in the region. But I wondered, generally speaking, that, since ARIN includes, countries like US and Canada, to what degree you think the needs and perspectives of the smaller developing countries, such as those in the Caribbean, that fall under ARIN are accommodated within the process?
Well, I think ARIN as an organization, they are realizing that having the conversation is great, but making sure that everyone is at the table, it's even better. We now have ARIN in the Caribbean, and in September, so throughout this year, we've been having, or ARIN has been having, a number of events bringing ARIN to persons in the Caribbean. There was one in Barbados, Grenada, a number of places within the Caribbean. And in September, I think it's the second week in September, we'll be having ARIN in the Caribbean, one in Kingston and one in Montego Bay.
Okay.
So the voice, and before ARIN in the Caribbean, it was called ARIN on the Road, where they were going to various places in Canada, in the United States, and in parts of the Caribbean. But now it's a more dedicated effort to get persons from the Caribbean to the table so that they understand, understand the policy development process and all of these things, so they're making sure that the Caribbean voice is much louder, because as I was saying, a lot of the issues that we take for granted, that, all of the issues that they're having, say, in deep rural Canada, that's first world issues. No, actually, when you talk about connectivity, and huge, going over hills and valleys, and the Caribbean terrain. We may not have snow in the Caribbean, but the terrain is pretty similar when you talk about, vast mountain ranges where persons can't get connectivity for various reasons other than, than the geographical reasons.
Yes.
And connectivity can be expensive, no matter where you are in the world. So yes, there are a number of issues that are unique to the Caribbean. However, they want to hear from us, and I've noticed it not only in ARIN but in other organizations as well, that the Caribbean voice is getting a bit louder.
Yes. Let's discuss amplifying the Caribbean's voice, because, as you said, there are a number of discussions, policy related discussions that are going on worldwide. Some of them may even be organized by regional organizations as well as international organizations. Mm-hmm. But so based on your involvement in ARIN, for example, and probably what you have observed at other meetings, what has been the Caribbean's participation in those discussions, and whether or not we are as visible at the table as perhaps you might think we should be? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, our participation has been fair, but I do think that it could be much greater. Reason being, when it comes to things like, a lot of these organizations have quarterly or biannual or even annual meetings, public meetings. And for these meetings, most of them have fellowships.
Okay.
And I'm always excited to see the Caribbean names come up for some of these fellowships. But, quite understandably, these fellowship opportunities is usually circulated in a small group. And I think that there needs to be, a way to get to even more persons so that they can be aware that these fellowships exist. And a fellowship would cover persons going and attending these meetings face to face. It covers your airfare and your accommodation and, small expenses. But it also is a chance for persons to be there in person to see how the conversations are going, how the conversations are done. I mean, there are differences between organizations. So ARIN meetings are very different from ICANN meetings.
Yes.
ICANN meetings are, you have your working groups and you have, different things, whereas ARIN, our structure is a little bit different. But I mean, fellowships are there for persons to be able to attend these things in person. And I think the word needs to get out there a bit more. For each of these meetings as well, most of these meetings at least, I've noticed that remote participation is a key element. I started taking part in ICANN and ARIN meetings since 2012 when I was at ICT4D Jamaica. And, remote participation isn't simply, it is a way to be a part of a meeting. But one very interesting thing that I saw with ARIN is that when we are voting on, say, a policy, it's not only the persons who are in the room that their votes are counted. The persons who are participating via remote participation link, their votes are counted as well. Mm. And when there are open discussions, open mic discussions, the participants who are remotely joining in, they can also have their, there's someone there dedicated, someone at those meetings dedicated to making sure that they're reading out the voices or reading out the comments of the remote participants. So it shouldn't be taken lightly. Yes, you may not be able to be there face to face, but remote participation is another very important way that persons, from the Caribbean can be a part of amplifying the Caribbean voice. Many of these organizations also have mailing lists. A mailing list is basically someone will pose, like take for instance, whatever a policy may be, one of the shepherds at ARIN would post that policy, and then in the policy development mailing list, persons would be able to go on and make comments. And those comments, along with those face-to-face comments that would come in at meetings, are all taken into consideration. So mailing lists are also a very, very good way to get your voice heard, because sometimes, for whatever reason, persons aren't able to participate remotely. But if a conversation is going on about a policy that has implications for the Caribbean, then of course, we need to make sure that we have enough persons, vocal persons, because having persons on a mailing list who aren't actually taking part in discussion really doesn't help. Vocal persons who are able to enrich the conversation or to add a Caribbean perspective, it makes the Caribbean voice much louder. And then there are discussion groups as well. So you have mailing lists and you have discussion groups. There are many ways that you can increase the Caribbean voice in the policy discussion. But also what I found in the last year is that a number of these organizations, internet policy or internet governance organizations, and whilst I've been involved in this arena since 2012, it's more pronounced now that, the nomination to the various board of trustees or the advisory councils, it's now a lot more. I'm seeing it a lot more. It could be because I'm a part of the whole ARIN process, but I'm seeing that going out a lot more. ARIN had a call for a Caribbean-based board of trustees earlier this year because they wanted someone with that specific skill set. I haven't heard the announcement of the successful candidate as yet, but they're making an effort to make sure that the Caribbean perspective is at the table, of all, internet policy discussions moving forward. So we are being included. It's just that, on the ground level with remote participation, mailing lists, and fellowships, we just need to get the word out there a lot more. And I think programs like your program, and the platform that you have is a great way to make sure that persons are aware of the various fellowships and ways to participate, mailing lists and things like that. So I will make an effort that, when I see these opportunities come my way, I'll share them with you so that you can share them with your audience as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, because it can be a bit challenging to just keep on top of all of the announcements that are happening, on a probably even weekly basis. Yes. From a variety of entities. Mm-hmm. Some who are having fellowships, some that are having certain discussions and webinars, and maybe even, important discussions on topics that that have been tabled. Mm-hmm. So I would really appreciate that.
No problems.
We have been talking about, the importance of Caribbean countries and citizens participating in internet policy discussions. But I'm a little concerned that, sadly, people still won't get it. Not necessarily just why it's important, but when we say internet policy discussions or internet governance discussions, what do we mean? If you can share some insight on that.
Sure. So when we talk about, the internet is, well, everybody knows what the internet is, but there has to be rules and regulations about how it is governed. Things like data security. Right now, there is a conversation. So we know all about the GDPR, but right now there is a conversation happening regarding the Whois database, yes, which basically gathers information. So everyone who has some sort of connection to whatever, a domain name or something like that, their information is held in a database. On the and I'm going to have to check. I'm going to share that there's an article that I read last week, okay, where there was a new guidance coming about, because there has been, a bit of uncertainty about what's going to be happening regarding Whois. But things like making sure that the information that is being held is justifiable. Yes. Things like are you allowed, and not only justifiable, but in the event that someone does something unscrupulous, can say law enforcement track this person using the information that they have provided. Little things like that, making sure that certain rules are followed when persons are capturing information on the internet. Internet governance covers not only persons who own space on the internet, but also it deals with the end user as well. So things like making sure that certain bits of information aren't put out there, making sure that things like bullying, internet bullying doesn't happen, making sure that entities outside of the EU are good stewards of the data that they hold. There are a number of things when it comes to internet governance and to internet policy that have to be taken into consideration.
I think that one of the things that certainly I appreciate is the fact that how the internet started, which was, among, colleges, it started as a military
Yes.
project, etc. But it was seen to be very open, very, very democratized.
Mm-hmm.
But the more as it has evolved, we cannot take for granted that everybody is of the same noble and altruistic
Exactly.
Mindset as was initially the case when it was being established in the first place. So I think what I am noticing is that as the internet has evolved, it has become more sophisticated and more complex, and the rules need to change. While we still may try to hold on to open internet and very collaborative, etc., we also need to have more controls in place, and it may be the tension between the controls and the openness that we are continually having to balance. And therefore, we as users in particular, what we may also appreciate is the fact that how we have been using the internet right now, currently, is also going to change, and we are going to be affected. So to the extent that we at least are aware of the conversations that are happening, the issues that are being discussed, and as necessary, we throw our 2 cents in.
Yes.
I think it's important that we at least consider the fact that we ought to be part of these conversations, especially since we are invited to sit at the table, as you said before.
Exactly. Because, when we look at, cell phone use over the last 10 years, and if we even look at, take for instance, some time ago, I saw that Facebook put out some information regarding where users are accessing, Facebook from. And in the early days of Facebook and other platforms like that, everyone was accessing that platform from, say, a computer.
Yes.
Now, the vast majority are using their phones, their smartphones, to access information like that. And having a tool like a smartphone in the palm of your hand, the average 2-year-old, the average 5-year-old is able to maneuver through a smartphone with ease, and how do we protect those smaller users who may not understand the implications of downloading an app and having a conversation with a nice person that they found on the internet, and not sharing their, their contact information? Or how do we make sure that the elderly person who may not be able to get to the bank on a regular basis, how do we make sure that they fully understand, how to perform banking transactions online in a safe and secure manner? So how we use the internet now is completely different from how we used the internet in the past. And we have to make sure that internet users are safe. And in the event that an internet user decides to use it for malicious purposes, that we are able to, or the powers that be are able to track that person or persons or entity, and, whatever rules and regulations that there are, that person is brought to face those things. We've seen examples of persons hacking into, we've seen ethical hacking, but then we've seen other ways of hacking as well. And we've seen how, persons have been able to swing public opinion overseas. We won't mention, what happened a few years ago, but yes, making sure that even something as simple as the information that exists, making sure it's coming from credible sources, fake news, setting up fake accounts on, say, on various platforms to kind of legitimize some fake news that's going out there. So things like that, we need to make sure that the internet, the policy that exists and, internet governance and those conversations take into consideration all of these things.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about the end users and how to responsibly use this wonderful tool that the internet is.
Excellent. All right. So for my final question, Kerrie, I understand that your term as an advisory council member will end this coming December, but you have been nominated to continue for a 3-year term. However, what would you hope to see or would like to accomplish by the end of your second term as an advisory council member? Fingers crossed that you are successful.
Yes. So elections are in October. So hopefully, and I'm fairly confident that, my voice has been heard in the last 6 months at ARIN. And my, persons are aware, that I am based in the Caribbean. And going forward, I think as a person from the Caribbean, I think it is whilst I have the ARIN Advisory Council work to do, and I can't be biased in the work that I do with ARIN, I also want to stand as a mentor for other persons within the Caribbean, so that they can see that there is someone who is one of us, who's there, who's doing the work that needs to be done, and making it clear that, it's not a very difficult process to get involved in, and making sure that all the information that comes my way, I'm sharing it as well, because at the end of the day, wouldn't it be lovely to have even more? I mean, we have Alicia Trotman from Barbados as my, Alicia is also on the ballot for October. And, we want to make sure that, we have more Caribbean voices. We want to be the mentors for persons. In the past, yes, we have had persons on the ballot from the Caribbean who, weren't able to get as many votes as required to be on that final listing. But we want to make sure that people understand that, we're here, we're approachable, and be the mentors that persons need. If persons need advice on things like, building out their policy development process, things like that, we want to be the mentors. But not only mentors, we want to make sure that whatever opportunities come up, we will be the ones to push that information out. We will be the ones who, the various bodies that exist, we want to have a voice with them within the Caribbean as well. We want to share the information with them, because it's not just policy. As we said earlier, there's the whole internet governance. There's a vast amount of information that exists in the archives of ARIN, and we want to be able to get that out there. I mean, we're doing ARIN in the Caribbean, but we just want to make sure that persons within the region understand that their voice, I'm just a representative. And whether or not I'm there after October, I want to make sure that we have persons there, persons, who are able to speak on behalf of the Caribbean, being able to enrich the conversation with the Caribbean perspective. I mean, we can't be biased, but we can bring our perspective from our various Caribbean nations.
Absolutely. All right, Kerrie, thank you so much. This has been great, and I hope that people will take the opportunity to go on the ARIN website, and we will probably have quite a few links to various ARIN-based information, as well as that for other internet governance organizations. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter at ICT Pulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.